Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our live stream, our live podcast interview, which is an unusual time for us. We usually don't do our live interviews at this time, but given that our guest is in Australia, different time zones, we decided to have a sort of an off-schedule interview here that will be just as, if not more, enlightening than our usual time that we have for these weekly podcasts. I'm going to interview our guest here, or introduce our guest here in just a moment. But in the meantime, I just want to let you know a little bit about this podcast and this discussion. This is a weekly live interview that we do for the Transformation Ground Control podcast, which is a weekly podcast that I host. You can learn more about that podcast by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. It's a weekly podcast about digital transformation, all things related to strategy, people, process, technology, and everything in between. So be sure to check out that podcast if you'd like to see past episodes of this show. And by being here today in this live discussion, you are part of the live production of the podcast. So we take this interview, we edit it, we polish it up. Not that it'll need polishing because we have such a good guest. I doubt we'll have to do much with it, but you know what I mean? We'll add some edits and add some new content to it, and then we'll release it as a formal podcast episode in about 2 weeks. So keep an eye on Transformation Ground Control for this episode. And if you want to see past episodes, you can check it out there too. My name is Eric Kimberling. For those that don't know me, I am the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. Third Stage Consulting is an independent and technology agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their digital transformation journeys, including software selection, implementation planning, and the implementation as well. So you can learn more about us by going to thirdstage-consulting.com. So our topic today is artificial intelligence's impact on business operations and its people. That is a mouthful, but that is the topic today. We're going to talk about AI and how it affects people and operations. And AI is such a hot topic right now. I think we're all trying to get our arms around it to some degree, but we're really going to dive into how it affects businesses and how we're really seeing businesses on the front lines really embrace it and where the opportunities are, perhaps where they aren't embracing it. And we're also going to talk about the impact on people within organizations too. So I'm excited for the conversation. Again, I'll introduce our guest who's going to help us unpack that topic here in just a moment. Before I do that, though, this is a live conversation, which means the reason we're doing this live is because we want audience questions. So any questions you might have for us, we'd love to hear your questions in the chat. If you don't mind just dropping them in the chat box wherever you're watching, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or even Instagram, please feel free to drop your questions or comments for us in the chat. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind just dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today too. We tend to draw in a global audience, so I always like to see where in the world everyone's joining from today. Or those of you that are in the middle of the day in Asia Pacific, or perhaps there's some of you up really late in Europe right now. I'd love to hear where you're joining from today. I myself am in the United States. My guest is in Sydney, Australia, and I'll let her introduce and talk more about that here in a moment. So before, as we're getting into all this, then I'd like to introduce our guests here to talk about artificial intelligence's impact on business operations and its people. Joining me to unpack this conversation is Ryder from Leading Edge Global. Lauren, thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
I'm excited to have you on the show, and this is a super interesting topic. I'm really excited to get into it, excited to hear the audience's questions as well. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You've got an interesting background and an interesting business you run there in Australia. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. My background has been in project delivery and change management, and then I was moving into transformation and running some quite large transformation projects across industries, starting in banking and finance, moving across to all sorts of industries, including things like construction and not-for-profits, all over, because a change is a change, as we know. When I started my business about 10 years ago, we were focused on digital transformation and really where that intersection of technology and humans are. So where that kind of, in tech speak, project management and change management, where they come together, but really it's how people engage with technology. And so that's where we grew our business. I know my business has been quite similar to yours, Eric. I know we've spoken in the past about this. So for those of you who know Eric's business, so we do a lot of ERPs and CRMs. But what's happened over time is that our clients are looking at more future-facing technologies. And we have found that looking at things like automation and now what we're calling AI has really been at the forefront. So it's not just about getting a new technology or a new platform in, but it's about how we can actually make our workforce more effective and more efficient with these new technologies. So we're spending a lot of time in that space with our clients and trying to help them to achieve those goals.
Yeah. Very cool. And you are also a podcast host too. I failed to mention that in the introduction here, but tell us a little bit about your podcast and why you're talking about it. I'm actually going to put up a QR code that anyone who's interested in listening to that podcast can find it on Apple Podcast, among other platforms. But tell us a little bit about the podcast, what inspired you to start it, what's it about, all that good stuff.
Sure. The podcast is called Leading Change. So in my dealings with CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, CFOs, all of the people who have been tasked by their board or the manager to actually lead a big transformation program, what I find is I was spending a lot more time coaching them on what they should be doing, what they should be saying, how they should be engaging their stakeholders, as opposed to actually supporting them through the change. And so I realized that actually there's a gap here. So no one gives leaders a formal handbook or a dummy's guide to leading change. And so I decided to create the podcast around that. And so I interview C-suite leaders about big transformations they've led. Often they are tech-led, but sometimes huge organizational restructures, BPOs, what have you. We've had one of every industry so far, and we're bringing in more. So really, it's how to lead change through an organization, how to get through the challenges, and to do it better when you are leading your next project.
Yeah, very cool. So it's called Leading Change. You can find the if you scan that QR code right here. If you're listening or watching the video version, you can scan that QR code right there, right next to my head. If you want to find it on Apple, you can also search for it on YouTube, Spotify, and just about everywhere else the podcasts are available. And I've actually listened to a couple episodes, and you're a very good podcast host as far as just being very smooth and articulate. It's very soothing. Actually, I'm learning a lot, but it's also very calming and relaxing. I almost feel like I'm meditating and learning about change at the same time when I listen to your podcast. So nice work with that. And I hope it is doing well for you so far.
Thank you. No, it's actually been really good. And that's really cool feedback. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll leave that up there for a second, the QR code for those that might be interested in following that. But one question before we get into, all the stuff about AI, and this is more of just a kind of your personal journey with Leading Edge and in your company and some of the international work you've done. You're based in Sydney, Australia. You do work obviously in Australia, but you're also working internationally outside of Australia and other regions of the world. Maybe tell us a little bit about, some of the regions you're working in right now and how that's going for you so far.
Yeah, sure. So back in August, I learned about an opportunity in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. They were having a huge country transformation. We transform companies, but this was a country transformation. And from what I was hearing, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I just jumped on a plane and went over to Saudi Arabia. There was and is huge amounts of opportunity to expand over there. So I spent time in Dubai, spent time in Saudi. I opened up a branch over there, and we've been doing work with big organizations, whether global or actually just based in those locations. It's been an incredible experience. I mean, the culture across the GCC is very different than most other countries that we deal with. Obviously, Dubai is a bit more Western. But Saudi Arabia just requires a lot more cultural understanding, looking at things differently. They take things a bit slower than we normally would. It's more relationship based. So, it's been a really interesting journey, just, doing business overseas there, but just with a completely different culture. But yeah, if anyone is listening and they want to expand their business or at least just explore, I suggest grab a plane ticket and go to Saudi Arabia. It's incredible right now.
Yeah. And something I learned from you before we went on this podcast as we were prepping for it is some of the cultural and societal changes happening in Saudi Arabia in particular, and perhaps other Middle Eastern countries as well. And the reason this came up is my first thought when you said you went to Saudi Arabia to expand your business is, not to make this a sexist conversation, but you are a female CEO. That's not the first profile I would imagine being something that would work in the Middle East. But from what you've told me, the things are changing there and there's more opportunity. Maybe tell us a little bit about that for those that may not know.
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of this Vision 2030, they have been changing a lot of the rules. So women empowerment is actually one of the pillars within the vision. And so what that means is they have now brought women into the workforce. A lot of the rules that they did have around women have changed and laxed. For example, women are driving now. They're going out without, a husband, partner, brother, person with them. And so there is a lot more, freedom in that regard. And they actually very highly educated, the Saudis. They actually spend a lot of time traveling overseas, London, US, Australia, and actually they're very highly educated. So you've got a lot of highly educated women who have been dying to get out into the workforce. And so it's really just this like big waterfall, which has been incredible. And part of actually one of the programs that I'm going to be running out there is about women in leadership and women in the workforce. And so, bringing some of those experiences into them to support them. Look, as an expat, what's interesting is expats don't have to wear an abaya, the long sort of dress coat or a headscarf. So I can actually wear what I want to wear, as long as it's conservative. So I'll wear, clothes to my wrists, and then I'll wear pants or a skirt, long skirt. So it's about being respectful in their country, very much so. But as a woman in business, honestly, they are so respectful of me. And I can see in the comments, Min has asked, what did I enjoy most? And really, it's the welcoming bit of being in Saudi Arabia, of just, they are so happy to show us their country and just feel warm and welcome. But also the respect that I get as a business owner. And I don't think they see it as me being a female business owner. They have the conversation with me just like they would a man. And so we talk about the business and the things that I can bring. And because I don't behave any differently than, I come in like I would anywhere else. I think that's how it's been taken. So it's just been a great experience.
Well, it's very cool. So it sounds like a lot of opportunity there, and you're getting some traction there, which is great. So congratulations on that. That's awesome. So with the clients you're working with, what are some of the biggest ways that you're seeing AI and automation? I'm going to kind of lump those together, even though they're technically different technologies. But when you look at AI and automation, what are some of the major benefits that clients you work with are seeing now? I know there's a lot of long-term potential that maybe we haven't fully realized yet, but how are you seeing organizations benefit from those technologies now?
Yeah, look, I do think it's actually worth splitting it up and actually saying, when we say AI, these days people, if you don't know anything about the tech, all you think about is ChatGPT or, DALL-E making your images. And it's really, it's really different than that. The technology has been around for a really long time. When I jumped into this area, it was probably, I'd say about 6-7 years ago. And that was when RPA was just starting, and, robotic process automation. It was literally just automating keystrokes. It was pretty straightforward technology. But that was, the first bots, the first, the PA that lived on your computer and made your job better. And so that was where we started. It moved into business process automation, where we would sort of start automating entire divisions. Finance was a huge example, customer service as well. And then we moved into sort of intelligent automation, where these bots actually could make some decisions, right? So if we have a mortgage application, you over this number, under this number, this is the way that we go. Again, the technology is actually not that complicated. It really is just getting your head around what it is. Now what we're talking about is generative AI and language models. And those are what I think companies are really looking into, how they can bring them in. I think where I'm seeing that is more in sort of the trial and error stage, as far as bringing that in. Some companies have been doing it well and doing it well for a while. For example, customer service, chatbots, and customer service desks who get information in and learning about what the customer's saying, so they can give them the right information back, or suggest what they might need to have or know. Those are really great applications, and those are some really good customer service benefits. So if I think about, to answer your question about what are the real benefits, most people go in there looking for efficiency and productivity, right? So how can we do things quicker and better, and then obviously increase the bottom line? And as I said, I think finance is a really easy one to start automating. Customer service is a great one. Manufacturing has been doing it a long time. And so for a long time. And what we find, interestingly enough, and the benefits, one thing that a lot of organizations go in there, when we start writing a business case and we start looking at what are the benefits of AI, and go, great, we can reduce our workforce by half, right? What we actually find is that initially that's not the case, and it shouldn't be part of your business case to initially, slash your workforce. What it actually is trying to do initially is to help your people be better at their job by taking off the really mundane tasks. And so if they have some help, then they can actually do better by the customer, be happier, be more productive in their job. So what we find, rather than actually kind of getting rid of entire divisions, which does happen, but generally what I see is more that people don't replace the people that have left. So you have natural attrition in any organization, but we find that once the company becomes more efficient, then and somebody leaves, that's when we start getting our savings. So there's a lot of, there are benefits and they're kind of through, but I think employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction are really big ones that we see all the time.
Yeah, and also just being able to do more with the same amount of people you have. So even before people leave and you have that attrition that you don't necessarily replace, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for organizations just to get more productivity and value out of the employees they have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you see, given that you work, for example, in Saudi Arabia and Australia, among other countries, do you see differences in AI adoption in different parts of the world, different levels of maturity?
There definitely is. And, I think I know India is a huge adopter. I know that Meta just created a whole big AI, farming data center for them. They really are big adopters across India, across industries. UAE, definitely, as I said, they're a lot more, they're very Western, like other countries. They're forward thinking. I know Singapore is doing a lot in that space, and China. There's a few countries that are a bit behind. I know some of the European countries, and just even having done research as I haven't worked there, but I know like Spain and France, I've been told they're not quite as advanced. Australia, and they're being here, not really huge risk takers in Australia. They like to see that other people in the world do it first. Right. So that's why in Australia, a lot of the take up was originally with just the process automation. It was pretty straightforward. And now they're seeing other people get benefits from sort of the more Gen AI, and that's what they're kind of looking at. But yeah, it's different. It's different adoption rates across the world. Interestingly, Saudi is doing a big investment in it, like things like Neom, the line, that really long building that goes on forever. They will be implementing stacks of really cool technology. I'm actually friends with one of the project managers there, and he was telling me it sounds amazing. But then if you go into their normal businesses, they're not quite ready for it there. So there's some business improvement. So I think there's pockets, which is probably true for most of the world.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear from the audience, where are you seeing AI being used in businesses or regions that you might be in? I'd be curious to hear your feedback. So drop in the chat, what examples are you seeing of AI being used in businesses? Are you seeing it being used in businesses? And what part of the world do you see AI being more heavily adopted, just based on your experience? I'd love to hear the feedback from the audience here. So you mentioned how, Australia and maybe parts of Europe are a little bit behind, or maybe you didn't use the word resistant, but perhaps they're a little bit resistant or skeptical of the technology. What do you think is causing that? Why are some organizations, some cultures, some parts of the world, why isn't everyone excited about AI and just going all in on the technology?
Well, I think the first one is investment. Look, it costs money to do this, right? And so that's number one. And I think that's probably the first start any business would look and go, how much should we invest? How much is this going to cost? And potentially it's taking them a while they might be actually interested, but it might be taking them a while to get their business case together. But I think the real challenge is they don't know how to get started. And that kind of reflects off of a skills gap. So if leaders don't know where we should get started, what the things we should be focusing on, how do we know, if we're doing it right, where do we start? All of those questions, because if you've never done it before, it can be really confusing. So we've got that kind of skill gap in the leadership space. So that's where we get it kicked off. And then they have to look at their organization and go, okay, well, we've got a skills gap in the tech space as well. So do we hire people in? Do we partner with a company to do this? Do we upskill our existing resources? And so those are really big challenges around that kind of skills piece. So there really is a huge opportunity in this education space around both leaders and employees. I think, you mentioned resistance, and I think there is a bit of cultural resistance. I think that's probably more towards the front line, because I think managers would go, hey, this is really great. I can make more money on my P&L. But, there is always this fear of people losing their job. And, that can hinder the adoption. Absolutely. And so, there's a few ways around that to make that happen. And that starts with with leaders starting with why are we doing this? What are we doing? Giving examples of how they've seen it work in the past, what it's going to mean for their job. The basic change management 101, right?
Yeah.
But I think, when we talk about it in a way that it's actually exciting and it's going to help them. I've heard companies, so they go, you're going to get a PA and you're going to be on your desktop and it's going to make you so much. And when it's said in a way like that, people do start to get excited. So a huge thing around kind of explaining that. Once we actually get into it, I think really the most important thing to get around that resistance is actually showing benefit early. And that's one thing that I think we see a lot of in general digital transformations, is that we spend a lot of time planning and getting it ready. We don't want to showcase anything until it's working.
Right.
But the challenge is, if we don't see it working, then how are we going to get the rest of the people on board? So what we say is, so if we say, why are people scared to get started? Well, don't think of it as a huge, big program. Think of it as, we're going to automate one process. We're going to pick the one thing that is, 80% of the process is great. 20% is causing us headaches, or whether it's our employees or our customers are complaining. How do we automate that piece, or just wrap tech around it to make it better? Get some wins, get some big supporters, then write your business case, because you're going to have so much support off the back of that.
Yeah. And it's a good example of a type of technology where a more agile approach like that is probably going to make a lot of sense. Whereas, when you have a proven mature technology, like a new ERP system, for example, that's where, getting things right and carefully configuring and building the system before you deploy it, because it's somewhat predictable. I mean, more so than AI, that, you might have a different approach with ERP systems, but with AI, it's probably better just to, like you said, start small, just get some use cases built and some momentum built within your organization. And I love what you said about leaders too. Leaders have to not only state the why, why are we doing this? And if we're not going to lay people off, then say it. We are not going to reduce headcount. We are not going to eliminate jobs. But the question then becomes, well, if you're not going to eliminate jobs and you're going to make me more efficient, I'm smart enough to know that something's going to change and I don't know what it is. And so how do you see leaders struggle with that? Like, instead of me saying, Lauren, I'm going to automate 30% of your time now because you're going to use AI to make your job easier. I mean, you probably want to know, well, what am I going to do with that 30% of my time then if I free up that capacity?
Well, I have seen it done really well, where and I think it stems from the fact that leaders seem to be really scared to share numbers. Like a lot of them just, I don't know why, cloak and dagger stuff. Whereas where I've seen it done really well is when they say, okay, here's our numbers. Here's what we're making. Here's what we want to make. Here's our goal. We're going to put this automation in place. We're going to be growing. And therefore, with that extra 30%, we're going to need you to do more work, right? But better work. And that's how we're going to do it. And so it's to hit targets, sales targets or revenue targets or margin, whatever targets you're looking for. But it's about that openness from leadership. And I think that, as I said, I think sometimes leaders are kind of scared of being wrong. Like, oh, if we put the wrong numbers out, what are they going to think? But actually what we find is the employees actually just like being part of it and knowing that, we're part of something and let's all go on this together. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes total sense. And what's interesting is the audience is commenting here on some things related to AI. Amin on YouTube says, I'm in Zagreb, and here in Croatia, it's not used a lot. So Croatia may be one of those Eastern European countries that's not as excited about AI, or not as quick to adapt. Another interesting comment, a follow-up question here from Demelade. I'm probably mispronouncing your name. I'm so sorry. This is on YouTube. AI is now getting a lot of adoption in application development with developers. This adoption is likely to filter through to application users such as ERP analysts and implementations with time.
And I think absolutely. But developers are using it in the background for sure. I've heard lots and lots of great stories and examples of that. But it does need to filter back into the business. And I think, being able to showcase what you're doing and how you're getting there, it will help with that kind of cultural adoption piece within the organization to go, actually, if this is helping you, it might be able to help me.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So development, AI for copywriting of all sorts. This is from William on YouTube, GPT Playground and Perplexity. I use it a lot for copywriting myself, which I love because I love to write, but I love not writing, but still writing even more than I love writing.
Yeah, I love outlines.
Yes, exactly. I like
I
ideas.
know what I want to
don't
say.
Right, exactly.
Someone just do the hard work for me.
Right, exactly. It's pretty amazing. I'll be honest. How far it's come, and just in the last year or two, it's come so far in terms of its ability to create based on your own ideas. I take a lot of my YouTube video transcripts and I use that to create written documents, which ChatGPT is really good at.
Yeah.
Um, this is interesting. This you were talking about Saudi Arabia earlier. This is from Abo from YouTube. And Abo says, in Saudi Arabia, we're planning to be a hub for AI between East and West because of AI consuming a lot of energy, which we have, and our government supports this approach. So it's super interesting. I never heard that, never thought of that.
It is. And actually, I went to the LEAP conference. Abo, you probably were there as well. I think everybody, like it was about 200,000 people went to that conference in Saudi Arabia back just a couple months ago or last month, and it was huge, and there was an entire pavilion dedicated to startups. Someone I was with counted there was about 600 little, when they got all the little booths one by one all lined up. I think he was counting. It was about 90-something% of them had AI in their name or on their wall. There is so much investment in Saudi Arabia in this area right now. So, absolutely, and the data consumption is a huge challenge for the rest of the world, well, for everyone really. But it's great that Saudi can support that.
Yeah, and you look at Dubai and Saudi Arabia and some of the Middle Eastern countries that have historically relied on energy. They still have energy, but it's interesting is they're investing so heavily in technology and other economies to try and diversify and prepare for the day when there's not as much oil and there's not as much energy available in the region. So I think that's super interesting that they're embracing AI in that way. Here's a comment from Keith on LinkedIn. Keith says, I'm seeing private AI being applied in due diligence in vendor selection and performance monitoring. Private AI allows companies to apply semantic ontology and proprietary data sets across large organizations.
That you're absolutely right, Keith. And one area I've seen a lot of private AI coming through is in the legal industry. There's, so for example, you've got 600 pages of discovery that you have to read through and classify everything and put them into, as I say, data sets and figure out what we do with it. And so lawyers are feeding in hundreds and hundreds of pages, getting really useful information back, and then asking the AI to say, okay, well, what are some arguments that I could take to court for this, right? And so now the fact is, particularly in the legal industry where you have to get it right, we can't rely on the AI, I'm sure you heard the case back a few months ago when the lawyer got disbarred, I think in the US, for just referring to cases that didn't actually exist when their ChatGPT went rogue. But actually putting it within your organization and actually, absolutely programming it so that it makes sense, as you say, with your own proprietary information. Absolutely. And that actually does lend itself to, there is a big discussion about AI ethics and what we can and should be putting into our AI and so, knowing that we're putting it safely in our organization and not sharing, for example, customer data or health data outside. So there's a lot of value in that private AI.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like if you or I were to take our client list, let's just say, not that we'd ever do this, we take our client list and we put it into OpenAI and ask it to create a graph that shows the logos of all of our clients. Does that client information now exist in the AI model that anyone could access? So I could go in and say, show me all of Lauren's clients, and it would be able to spit that back because it learned from me when I entered it. Is that, or it learned from you when you entered it?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's that exact, but basically once information is in there, it can be accessed. And I think it's just knowing that, and that's part of the education piece for employees, what you can and can't and what you should and shouldn't be putting into your AI.
Yeah. Super confidential IP type stuff. You probably don't want to start there.
Yeah, data privacy, cybersecurity, all of those all get wrapped up in this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Here's another interesting comment from Amin on YouTube again. Actually, I talked with 2 leaders that told me they don't want AI because their employees will be more productive and it will only make more coffee breaks, which kind of gets back to the point earlier. Like if you're going to make people more productive, give them something to do to replace that increased productivity.
Yeah, I would say that those 2 leaders might be able to benefit from a leadership development course.
Right. Yeah, it sounds pretty old school to me, but so be it. But well, good. What are some of the biggest challenges or obstacles to adoption that you see organizations face? I know we talked about how certain parts of the world and certain organizations are resisting it. But let's just say they're open to it and they're not necessarily resisting AI and some of the potential benefits. What are the biggest obstacles that you see with organizations that want to do it?
Yeah. So I think the first one is, and I think I referred to it earlier, is knowing where to start, knowing which piece should we go. So, there's a few different ways, and you can call it like the problem definition, or the thing that we need to solve. And so, there's different ways that we can go about it, and there's different methods that we take our clients through. Generally, we say start with the customer. Where are you finding customer issues? What's bringing your NPS down? Find something there that you can go forward with. And then I think it's also, I think the big question is, what do we have that is special, that is different? Like in the finance industry, we call it our alpha, right? What's the thing that makes us outperform our competition on a normal day? And often that's something like special data set that you might have. An example that I like to give is a client, and they own and operate shopping centers. And so they have, which is, but they do advertising within it. And so how are they different from any other advertising? Well, they've got shoppers within a shopping center, and guess what? They've got apps, so they've got data information from their about their customers. They can see them walking through. They've got Wi-Fi, beacon data, all this data within the center about shoppers that no other ones of their competitors have. So suddenly that's our alpha. That's our thing that's going to make us outperform. So how do we then design our AI to be able to give us really useful information that's going to help us outperform by using that? And I think that's really important. And one of the challenges that comes through that is, okay, great. So we've got data. Where is our data? And, how is it, and I think that's, again, another stumbling block. So is our data structured? Is it unstructured? Where is it? Is it easily accessible? And then people kind of go, oh crap, does that mean I have to create a data lake? And, there's a lot of kind of, obstacles that people run up against. They don't have to be, but I think mentally there's a lot of blocks, because I've run an IT project before, but this is different. So I think those are kind of some of the big ones. And then finally, always we bring in the people issue, and I think the culture piece is really, really important. And I think that, we what we do is we go into companies and say, you are now a innovative culture. This is who you are. Whether you put it, maybe we need to look at our values and actually, refresh those. But we are a company that looks to innovate, that looks to do things better, do efficiently, effectively, what have you. So that culture has to be through the entire organization. We can't just have a pocket, because what we know is data doesn't just touch one team. Like if we've got, a sales team making sales data, we've got a marketing team feeding things in there. And on the other side, we've got operations, and, we've got all sorts of other pieces that in the finance team, everyone talks to one another. So business units don't operate in isolation. So you can't just have one team that's really innovative. And I think, infiltrating that culture means that the CEO has to be on board with this, and they have to drive it. And again, can be a bit of a challenge. They can say, yes, I want it, here's some money. But if they're not demonstrating and talking about it with their business, they're not going to get that leverage.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. So cultural, allowing your culture to shift and to embrace the technology and be open to it is one. Amin, I'll just pop the comment up again just for the audience here, but Amin mentioned how, the leader that was afraid of AI because it'll make people more productive and then they'll just have more coffee breaks. I'd be curious to hear beyond, in addition to what Amin said here, what do you see as some of the biggest obstacles? This question's for the audience. What do you see as the biggest obstacles to AI adoption within businesses and enterprises throughout the world? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If you're part of an organization, I'd love to hear whether or not your organization is embracing it. If you're a consultant, I'd love to hear how you see your clients embracing or resisting it. That's be good feedback to hear from you here. And this is from ZIC on YouTube. ZIC says, what about the risks of making smarter employees by using AI at the price of making more stupid organizations? If we do it the same way our competitors do, we will be just a flat copy of the others. So
I have spent many hours contemplating this and what the future of organizations look like. And to me, it's actually a little bit scary because, I mean, if I give some examples, so I have a friend who he runs a company here in Australia. It's like a swimsuit business, and he has an AI tool that they basically put in. This is what we're selling. This is the audience. Upload some photos, and basically you hit go, and it creates an entire marketing plan for this particular product,
Hmm.
right? Now, when I spoke to him, that was probably about 6, 8 months ago. So that was it. Now I'm seeing we've got AI that will actually take, you've got the photos, it'll actually and it does includes your copy for your socials, but it can actually post your socials. It can measure your ROI. If you're not making enough money, it'll do your A/B testing. Basically, we've outsourced the entire marketing function,
Hmm.
right? And you're absolutely right, Zach, that if we are all using the same tools, every single company will be marketing the same way. And so we have to then go back and think, okay, well, if we're automating those things, what are the things that we really should be using our human brains for?
Yeah.
And that's when we do have to make smarter organizations, and that's when our skill sets should start to change. And we need to train on higher level cognitive and social emotional skills on how to make better decisions, a really important skill, how to be more creative and work better and collaboratively, and to understand your customers at a deep empathetic level so that you can approach things differently than
Right.
your competitor. So, those questions, those are the ones that keep me up at night. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, as you were describing that, Lauren, I couldn't help but think of like I was thinking to myself, what was the last major technological shift that might have been somewhat comparable to this? And it may, I feel like AI in my lifetime, at least in my opinion, AI has been the most significant technological shift. I don't remember anything quite this tectonic in the industry,
well,
but
I think maybe when we moved to the cloud, when everything was
yeah,
suddenly cloud-based, because you'd remember everything. We had all of our systems on site, and now they're in the cloud. And the changes that a business would have to face is suddenly again we're other than a little bit of change, we basically have to use the same program as everyone else, right? Because
yeah,
we're at the whim, with the mercy of, and suddenly we think we've lost our competitiveness. But look, organizations have adjusted and adopted, and it's not like that, even though we
yeah,
are all in the cloud. And
yeah,
so
sure.
I think people are smart enough to be able to shift and adapt.
Yeah. Well, and you think about like in the 90s when the internet was first, even before a cloud, the precursor to the cloud obviously was the internet. And you think about like the big changes that the internet entailed. That entailed a certain amount of automation that came with the internet, a certain amount of open access to knowledge and sharing. And we suddenly, as a human race, over the last 25, 30 years, have become exponentially smarter in a faster, shorter period than, decades or centuries before us. So you'd think, well, maybe the internet was similar in that, that you could have said the same thing about the internet. It's going to make us all equal. It's going to make businesses equal because now all of a sudden we're all accessing the same information, the same data. But that's not the case. I mean, there's still winners and losers and some that outperform others. So I've got to think the same is going to be true with AI. It's going to be in the short term. I think it's going to be people that embrace AI and figure out how to use it to their advantage in the short term. Longer term, as your competition catches up, of course, then you've got to keep innovating and figuring out new ways. But I think you're right. I think the human component can't go away. I don't see how it could. I think it's just going to, like you keep saying, it's going to change your job and change the skills that you need in this post AI world that we're in right now.
Well, that's right. I mean, I've got teenage kids. I tell my 17-year-old daughter, I said, the job that that you're going to have doesn't exist today.
Yeah.
So things are changing, and I do think it's really just flows down to human nature. As you said, the internet, we adapted. The cloud, we adapted, and people just want to win. People want to do better. They want to improve themselves, right? And so we will find ways around it. That's just human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, here's another question on YouTube from Amin. Thank you for all the questions, Amin. And after all these questions, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. So because if I'm saying it wrong, I've said it wrong many times. But the question here is a BCG Boston Consulting Group study showed that learned language models make individuals more productive, but when it came to a group, it makes it the opposite. So it's making groups less productive. Have you seen anything along those lines, Lauren, or is that
I
maybe how?
haven't seen that study. What I can say is, when I do sort of introduce and talk about this, I say, these LLMs and the Gen AI, the tools that we use are great for personal productivity. And so, and that's exactly what I call them. They're personal productivity tools. And what I talk about is enterprise AI. And so to me, I see it actually, they're different. It's a different conversation. So yeah, I can see how that study would give you that information. I mean, when it says when it comes to a group, I don't know if they're saying they're using the same kind of tool together, or whether it's something like, as I mentioned, a great, that customer service example where they start learning through what the customers and the employees are putting in, and they learn what to do. And yeah, that would make people less intelligent, because you get fed the information. So if you're sitting at a customer service desk and the language model has learned for you, of course you don't need to be creative, because somebody calls in for a password reset, and it's heard it, it knows it, the password reset's already in the person's inbox without you having to do anything. Absolutely, you're not going to be doing any more work than you have to. So if that's what that study is referring to, I get it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I'm going to keep rolling with these questions here because they're really good ones here. This is from YouTube as well. How do you answer an employee that is reticent to AI, who tells that being more productive is to make ourselves work more? So in other words, do you think employees might resist AI because we're just going to ask them to do something different, automate part of their job, and take on more responsibility?
Look, resistance comes in all forms. So as we know, when we're rolling out change, some people are going to be early adopters, some people are going to sit on the fence and wait, and some people are going to dig in. And and there's active resistance and there's passive resistance, and it sounds like this person is actually quite actively resistant. And I would say that those are actually the easiest people to deal with in an organization, because you know exactly what their problem is. So you start using some really great questioning techniques. I don't know, like 5 why. Why do you think that? Why? Get them down to the real essence of why they're actually saying this. Because what they're saying is be more productive, make ourselves work more. Why do they think that? Because this could be something that is some sort of unconscious bias they've had since they were a child about, the nature of work. Well, that's cool. We can work around that. Right. But, so if we can address the why they actually feel that way, that's actually easy. And then, as I said, the next big step is to demonstrate, actually show them, because at some point they're going to go, I still don't like it. Okay. You know what? Let's get this one out. Let's pilot it, or just show it. Just do the first one, shall we say. Next, we've got it. We've got you on board. How cool is that?
Yeah. Very, very true. And I agree with the active resistance in some ways is easier to deal with because it's so obvious. It's on the surface. It's not hidden. There's no passive aggressive nature to it. Typically it's something you could tackle head on. This is just more of a comment from William on YouTube. He says clients will resist AI the same way they resist everything else. So he's not the glass half full kind of guy when it comes to AI. It sounds like he's glass half empty, perhaps, when it comes to people's acceptance of AI. But you could be right. We'll find out over time. I remember when when I was a kid, my parents worked at Digital Equipment Corporation, and they were, which no longer exists, but at the time it was a fairly big computer manufacturer. And I remember when robotics were first coming around in the 80s, and it was becoming kind of a big deal for manufacturing. And they were introducing robotics on the manufacturing floor of Digital Equipment. And I remember the fear that I heard from my parents, but I also heard it from others. Even as a kid, I remember everyone was sort of afraid that the robots were going to take all the manufacturing jobs. And even today you look and you're like, that hasn't really happened. There's a ton of robotics now on manufacturing shop floors, but it's totally changed what it means to be a manufacturing shop floor clerk or a warehouse clerk. Your job's different. You're not, it may have eliminated some over time through attrition, like you mentioned, but I feel like it's just changed it and people have had to adapt to it. And for the most part, I think they have.
And I've had a really great example recently. I met with this guy. They're one of the biggest farmers in Australia, but they're particularly the biggest tomato farmer, or tomato for our American viewers. And so they've actually built robotics through their entire a greenhouse, call it greenhouses. I say it's huge. And so they've got these robots running back and forth, and they're fertilizing. Initially, they're going to be picking. They're going to be doing all sorts of farm work. And so I said to him, obviously my first question is, okay, so what about your workforce, right? Because right now they have people walking around fertilizing tomato plants. And so what do we do? So it turns out, for something like farming, they, I don't know if anyone across the world knows this. If you do want to come to Australia, we have visas where you can actually come and pick fruit and vegetables at farms. And so it's pretty cool. And so he said, basically, we don't have to necessarily run that program anymore because we don't need people to come and to pick and to fertilize. However, he said, the staff that we have, what we're doing is we're upskilling them. And we're training them how to manage the robots, and they're really just putting them through education programs. So there are, yes, they're saving the money of not hiring the people on an annual basis, but then they're also giving upskill and giving people, new jobs for the future, which, because you can take that to any other farm after that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Rolling with the changes for sure. Now you mentioned before, Lauren, you talked about culture and the importance of shifting a culture to be more in line with adopting AI and even other emerging technologies. But beyond that, what are some of the biggest impacts on people at organizations that are deploying AI initiatives?
Yeah, so I think, the first one is we need to make sure we're structured the right way. And the thing is, there is no right answer for this one, because as you know, you'd work in an organization where IT is centralized or it's not, or, we outsource or we don't. There's all sorts of different ways that a company can structure their business. But, there are a few options. And I think, one that works really well is having some sort of an innovation team who sits, who runs that with the data. Like you might already have a data team. And we actually bring some innovation into that. So they're actually responsible for the culture, but also for the data and how we actually roll that out. So having that kind of leadership level that's actually driving that change as far as people impacts, I think that is a really sort of necessary function. So it might not be an individual role, but you might give that as a job to somebody who already exists. So I think that's really big. I think, I suppose, so some of the other kind of things that are impacting people, I think it's the structures, I think, are the big one, and how we actually work within the organization and with our robots. So mapping that out and understanding what our job role is today and then what our job role is in the future. So we've kind of got two parts of it. One's the management and the delivery. So do we have an in-house team? Do we outsource? All of that sort of thing. But then we've got the people who use it and go, what does that mean? And so, so as I said, this is not an isolated thing. We bring HR in for this, because if people's jobs roles are changing, we need to make sure that that's included, and maybe their KPIs need to change as well because of what they're doing differently. So I think, when it comes to people, we have to look at every single impact from every single side as we roll it out.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, identify what the change impacts are, and, how processes are going to look, how exactly they're going to use AI, what they shouldn't do, what are the parameters, per your point earlier. If you've got confidential information or IP, you want to make sure you're not using open AI models for that. So it's just, kind of defining people's jobs, their roles and responsibilities, and setting those expectations. It's really no different. In a lot of ways, it's no different than deploying ERP or CRM or a financial and accounting system. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. It's just different technology and different.
It is. It's the same thing, but with nuances, right? And so you have to go, okay, well, I always say, we start with strategy and planning. Okay, that's great. But again, as I've mentioned, how do we choose what we actually going to automate, or what technology are we going to use? Where are we going to find our data? How are we going to structure organization people? How is our adoption going to work? So all of the areas that we look at on any single project. But as we've discussed, we just have some AI nuances that we need to weave through as we roll it out.
Right. No, that's very, very cool. How do you predict? So if you have to, you said you've spent a lot of time contemplating and thinking about how AI might it neutralize or level the playing field for organizations, or make organizations look more similar in the future. Aside from that, how do you predict that organizations will adjust to AI and other emerging technologies in the coming years? Like, if you were to get your crystal ball out, what do you see happening with AI within the enterprise and business space?
Yeah, so I think so. I actually heard this incredible story about this team that wrote some sort of an AI that created an organization, had a CEO, a CFO, a CMO, I don't know, developers, etc. And they set it to go, and they all spoke to one another. They created a company, they created a business idea, and then within something like 42 seconds, they had a working website that could actually do, trading, right? So if we look at that as the future, that businesses, could be fully automated, like 100%, do we even need it? And I will tell you, just on that story, apparently the CEO didn't have much to say.
Oh, really?
That was good.
Yeah.
So yeah. So if we look at it with that as the obviously clearly extreme lens on, what does that actually mean for organizations? And I think what we need to do, what we're going to see is a real culture shift. And it's going to have to be across industry, and it's going to have to be, we're digital workers first, right? We look at, process automation and ethical automation, and this is who we are, and this is how we engage, and this is how we can better serve the customer. And our first thought is, how do we do that using AI? And that, I think, is how businesses are going to shift in the future. And if I give a different example, because obviously people will still need to exist, because if we give an example, there's a cafe, right, that's actually put in ordering through their chatbot. And so we still have to have human interaction. We still need food. We still need, service. Right. So if you put that chatbot in and somebody walks in and they sign into their app and they put in their order, right? So first of all, the order is more efficient for the customer. They can get like personalized recommendations. Oh, you ordered a latte yesterday. Do you want a latte with caramel today, or whatever? Or they just suggest what you already have. They know you, right? And they can upsell you, right? What I love about that is we suddenly have data on when people are buying, how often. So we know how many staff to put on. We know how much milk we've just gone through. So we know exactly how much to order so that we don't have any wastage anymore. Right. So there's all sorts, and we can then start marketing to people because we know all of this information. And so I think, when we're talking about the business of the future, and as I say, how can we bring AI into every single part of your business? That is it. We take it as a coffee shop, and we take all of that. We take data-driven decision-making at a core, and then we say, how are we going to drive data into every single part of our customer experience? That's, I think, the way to really look at it.
Yeah. And even if you do assume for a moment that AI could level the playing field or equalize organizations and teams and people, it's a little misleading, because the ones that really succeed with AI and are going to get more out of AI are the ones that handle the leadership and adoption and the change better than others. They're the ones that are going to have better data. So the ones that are able to actually leverage clean data and make those AI models and algorithms more effective and accurate and that sort of thing, there's still going to be disparity there, because I would think, because even just because the technology on the surface is available to everyone, if you don't have the data and the adoption and the processes built to use it, that's going to be the new competitive advantage. It's not going to be the fact that you're using AI. It's going to be the fact that you were able to use it better and integrate it into your operations better. Similar to ERP systems, you look at ERP systems, you could argue that anyone who uses SAP or Microsoft D365 or whatever, you could argue that they're all equal. They're all that eventually is going to make them all perform at a par level, but that's not at all what we're seeing. We're seeing that some organizations completely fail in their deployments. They don't get value out of it. Where you see others that are wildly successful, and then you see a lot in between. So I'd imagine it would be similar with AI and it's going to take decades to see that shake out, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And it goes back to that skill set and the leaders and the skills inside the business. Absolutely. Yeah. You've got it, then use it, leverage it, drive it. As I said, pop it into your KPIs, and people will actually perform.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask one more question from the audience, and then I've got another kind of a closing question for you, Lauren. But this is from, I don't know if it's Zach or ZAC. I'll call him ZAC just because he put it in all caps, but he or she, I'm sorry, I don't know for sure that's he or she. But on YouTube says, how about this new role of the chief AI officer? That's something that we haven't talked about yet, but that does seem to be an emerging and an increasingly common role and executive title. What are your thoughts here? Are you seeing this become a real thing?
I am one of the people that AI is a buzzword. AI is the word of the moment. The first person who says it in a conversation wins bingo, right? And
Right.
so, look, I think the chief AI officer is what the chief transformation officer should be. If you really are in charge of transforming your business, you should be putting an AI hat on and actually have that as part of your remit. Now, if there is no chief transformation officer, if there is no sort of chief technology officer, and that's all we've got, and that person looks after the rest, okay, but I don't see it as a separate role to somebody who actually already has the job to roll out new technology. So whether that's a CIO or otherwise, I do get the idea that we need to put, some companies, and I've said we need to change the culture. We need to show that we are in with this. Is that a chief AI officer? Okay, maybe. I
Yeah.
haven't really seen it coming through much yet. But as I said, Australia is often behind. This might be more of an American thing coming through.
Yeah, I've seen it intermittently or occasionally, but it does seem like it's becoming more common. But I tend to agree with you. I mean, it's sort of like if you had a chief cloud officer right now. Okay, maybe, but like in 5 years, we're not going to be talking about the cloud, not because the cloud's not relevant, but just because that's just the way it is. I mean, we're all in the cloud, so big deal.
Yeah.
We're done migrating to the cloud. Now it's just about technology and general transformation and stuff. So
That's right. Yeah. I
totally
mean, look,
agree.
if it's the way that a business needs to spotlight that this is important to us by putting a person in that role, well, then, more power to them, and maybe that will help. But I don't see it as a long-term solution. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll share this comment before I ask you my last question, just mainly to get you motivated and psyched to answer my last question here. But this is from John on YouTube. Says, double down on purpose and people. The technology is an enabler. Building and sustaining organizational capability is the key. Very well captured, Lauren. So I think it's safe to say John is a fan of this conversation with you, Lauren. So thank you for that. Um, so, and then actually I have to share this too, even though I keep saying it's the last one. This is from John as well. Chief Happy Officer, latest CXO. So that is not a bad
Yes.
idea.
Yes, I love that one. Isn't that what we're trying to do? We're trying to get happy employees and happy customers. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's a hallmark of a
We all
great
want to be happy.
business. And so, yeah, chief happy officer. That means we automate everything. Go for it.
Exactly.
Love it.
So just to sort of bring this all full circle and put a bow on it, what are your recommendations in sort of first steps for an organization or a team that's thinking about AI or they're not sure how to get started? Where do you recommend your clients get started in their journeys to AI?
Yeah. So my first thing is don't start with the technology. Leave that. Start with your problem. Start with your problem statement, your problem definition. As I say, it's easier to start with a customer problem than it is anything else, or if you have some serious inefficiencies in your business. So find out, where that sort of that 20% that really is a real challenge area, and start looking at that. And it also look at your data, look at what you've already got, understand what you can take and what you can leverage. I think, if you are challenged, one thing that we do is we run a workshop with our clients where we actually workshop through all of these questions. We have a whole, way we look, what do our business needs? What is our ROI going to be? Where are we going to start? All of those sort of questions that we work through. And also, what technology do you already own? You might already have AWS or Microsoft. Is that the right platform for you to start on? Maybe, maybe not. So there are a lot of questions that come through, but I say just start with understanding what your problem is, and then it'll take off from there.
Right. It's great advice. That's a great place to start. And I think if we sort of take the buzzworthiness away and just back up and look at our business and the problems and what we're trying to accomplish, I mean, it really, for any technology, it comes back to that. What are you trying to accomplish? How are you going to get your people on board? And then how can you selectively use technology in the right ways to make your business better? So it's really no different. The good news is there are nuances, like you said, but it's not that different than how we've adapted and tried to figure out how to use other technologies over the years. So that's so very cool. So tell us the best way to learn about you. I'm going to share on the screen here. I'll share a QR code that'll take you to Lauren's company's website. but what are the best ways to connect with you personally on social media, or what's your preference?
Sure. So find me on LinkedIn. That is my prime platform. We do have some others, but that's where you're going to find me. So just look up Lauren Ryder and go ahead and connect. Would love to have a chat and continue the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's Ryder, Ryder too. If you look her up, make sure you spell Lauren's Lauren and Ryder's Ryder. Just make sure you get the right Lauren Ryder, based out of Sydney, Australia. So, well, great. Well, thanks for being here, Lauren. This was a great conversation, super fun. You're a great guest. You're an even better podcast host, so do check out her podcast. If when you get a chance on Apple Podcast, YouTube, etc., love to have you back again and continue this conversation, because we could have gone for hours longer. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you to the audience for the great questions. You had really good questions, at times entertaining and humorous as well. So thank you. That's always fun too, when it's not all business. It's not all serious. So thank you for that. It makes our jobs a lot easier. So thanks for that. You can find this episode again. You'll find it, I believe, in 2 weeks from tomorrow. So today is Wednesday, April 3rd, or Thursday, April 4th in Australia. 2 weeks from, I believe, will be the 17th of April. You'll find the Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that features this interview. So check it out. You can also go to transformationgroundcontrol.com for past episodes. You can also keep up with every episode as it comes out at transformationgroundcontrol.com. We do these live streams as part of the podcast production every week. So keep an eye out on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and at times Instagram when we can get it to work. We're streaming to there as well. So be sure to check that out and keep an eye out for that too. So have a great week, everyone. Look forward to seeing you next time, and we will chat with you soon.
Thanks. See y'all.